Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we're going to have a briefer discussion than usual, but it's about some things that I definitely want to talk about here. There have been some leaks surrounding Nintendo, the Switch 2, and Pokémon, and when you start to think about these leaks, I actually think they have some pretty big implications about Pokémon's 30th anniversary. We are approaching Pokémon Day, February 27th, we're just a few weeks away, and I'm sure the discussions surrounding the 30th anniversary are only going to continue to ramp up as we approach that day. And so this is probably just going to be one of many discussions about the 30th anniversary, but there are some interesting things going on right now, so that's what we're getting into. So the first thing I want to get into is the recent leak about this product code for another Nintendo device. So this is what we know. Sky on Blue Sky reported this information. They were looking at Nintendo's account portal and they found an unused model code under the name OSM. For context, the Switch 2's model code is BEE. And they found, when requesting for images for the OSM product code, an image of a Switch 2 comes up, which is leading many to believe that we are looking at a revision for the Switch 2 already. Now, we do not know exactly what this is, we do not know when this would be coming out. But I'll tell you this, it's probably not just like a special edition. Some people have theorized that, but as I talked about a few days ago, we've already seen on different Switch Lites, for example, you will see the same product code. If it's a special Pokemon edition, if it's one of the original releases, if it's a different color, they all have the same product code. So with this in mind, it's more reason to think that this OSM thing is not the exact same Switch 2 we already have. Maybe somehow it's not even a Switch 2, that is a possibility. Maybe it's just related to the Switch 2, like some kind of peripheral, and they haven't uploaded the exact image yet. That's a possibility, but let's entertain the possibility that most people are considering here, that this is perhaps a sign that Nintendo inadvertently put out there that we are getting a Switch 2 Lite in the not-so-distant future. Again, this does not tell us when it's coming out. This could be something that's been put out there well in advance, but I honestly would not be surprised if this is legitimately a sign for a Switch 2 Lite, and it is coming out in the second half of this year. Some people might think that's weird, because the Switch 1 Lite came out September 2019, about 2.5 years removed from the launch of the original Switch. But maybe we shouldn't be looking at things in terms of how late we are into a generation, but rather what else is going on, such as perhaps the release of the next generation of Pokémon. Whenever we have the first exclusive new generation of Pokémon on a Nintendo platform, it is a huge release. It's a moment where we're likely going to see something with historical sales. And according to the Terra leaks, and just common sense based off what we've seen throughout the Pokemon releases, we're going to be getting the 10th generation of Pokemon this year for the 30th anniversary, and the Terra leaks have suggested, the most recent ones, that this game is aimed to be a Switch 2 exclusive. Perhaps those plans can change, but if that plan maintains, maybe Nintendo's going to need to put out a Switch 2 Lite for this giant release. In 2019, the Switch Lite came out a few months before the launch of Pokémon Sword and Shield, the first new generation exclusive to the Switch 1. And we've seen hardware revisions like this come out for new generations before, such as back in 2013, when the Nintendo 2DS line came out alongside Pokémon X and Y. So there's already a history of Nintendo putting out hardware revisions when there's a new generation of Pokemon. So if we're getting the 10th generation of Pokemon exclusive to Switch 2 this year, it might actually make a lot of sense to put out a Switch 2 Lite in the second half of the year, especially considering the price point of Switch 2. It is more expensive. This is a challenging time in terms of just the overall economic climate. Nintendo likely is trying to look for solutions to reach the largest audience possible, and perhaps putting out a Switch 2 Lite earlier than what maybe some people are thinking is one great way to do that. Now, this Switch 2 Lite, I assume, would be kind of like the Switch 1 Lite. It would be smaller, it would not be dockable, or at least it would not come with a dock, and so you'd be able to put together something that is cheaper so more people can pick it up, and with a new generation of Pokemon, it would probably lead to some extraordinary sales here. And I don't think this should be something that should upset people, to be honest, because one, this would be a cheaper version of the Switch 2 that would be lacking in features, so I don't feel like people who were early adopters would be upset about this, at least most people wouldn't. In other words, while there may be some of you in the comments saying, well, I don't like this, it's okay, you don't have to like it, but in terms of it being like a big PR issue or a big marketing problem, it would not be. It would be the opposite. And also, there's plenty of precedent of Nintendo releasing revisions pretty early on into a generation. The original Nintendo DS came out in November 2004, and only a year and a few months later, not even a year and a half, we saw the Nintendo DS Lite come out in Japan, and just a few short months later, basically a year and a half total, it came out in North America. So that's one big example of a significant revision coming out pretty early on into a generation. So considering the circumstances, I feel like if we were to get a Switch 2 Lite in the months between September and November of this year, that would be basically a very similar situation to the Switch 1 Lite, and with the new generation of Pokemon, honestly, it makes a lot of sense, and I'm almost ready to predict that's literally what's happening, and that's why we see this new product code on Nintendo's account portal, with a Switch 2 picture attached to it. So we could be looking at a Switch 2 Lite, and perhaps even some special edition versions of it, for the new generation of Pokemon, this year. Again, not confirmed, this is speculation based off leaks, but I do think it makes a lot of sense. Now, if you've gone this far into the video and you find yourself enjoying this video or some of my other videos and you haven't subscribed already, I would very much appreciate your subscription. Continuing on though, something else I want to talk about, I haven't gone to this yet, the last time I put out a Pokemon video was at the end of December, but there have been updates to the Terra Leak regarding the 10th generation of Pokemon. Presumably, they'll be called the Pokemon Winds and Waves. I'll link the thread in the description below. Eclipse does a great job of summarizing a lot of the understandings we've come to with the latest info we've gotten from the Terra Leak. But to summarize here, basically from the latest information that is still subject to change, but perhaps more likely to be a better approximation for what we're actually going to be getting, some things have been scaled down. We had initially heard that there was going to be a mass of procedurally generated islands, something maybe kind of like No Man's Sky, where there's a whole bunch of procedurally generated worlds to explore in a solar system. In this case, you would have a wide ocean with procedurally generated islands. That was a concept they had, but it's since been scaled down to apparently just one island that will have the procedural generation, so it's going to be a fun island to revisit because it's going to be different every time, which will be cool. But the rest of the world is not going to be made in that way. Some people might find this to be a disappointment because they are scaling down or cutting features or elements of the game, but I think it should be understood that this kind of thing happens in game development all the time. This is nothing new, this is not odd, this is the standard for there to be different ideas and plans to be cut or scaled down. That's just how it is. For example, in Breath of the Wild, they had plans to put in a claw shot, but they changed those plans because they figured it would be a better fit to do something else. They are continually working on making the best game possible, and some of that may come down to scaling back on your ambition a little bit and trying to put something together that's more manageable, but hopefully better executed and more polished, which, based off Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, was a huge issue. So hopefully this time around with more time, perhaps making it exclusively for the Switch 2 if that plan still maintains, will contribute to a better performing, more polished game. At least with Pokemon Legends EA, while they did certainly scale down, let's say, the ambition compared to Scarlet and Violet, it did run way better and had way less glitches. It was a fine release. So I will actually argue this is a good sign here, and at least we're going to see a little bit of that, and perhaps that's a testing ground for more stuff in the future, where they play around with more procedurally generated stuff, and perhaps some people don't even like the idea of procedurally generated islands and such, and perhaps they would prefer for most of the world to be just finely tuned and catered, and from the leak, that's what we're hearing about here. We're also hearing there's going to be all new Pokemon models, and this has a lot to do with reanimating the Pokemon to work within the new systems for Generation 10. There are some examples brought up like Charizard and Lumineon giving off natural light. In other words, they can be used as essentially HMs throughout the world. So there'll be different Pokemon that have been changed around to fit different situations like this. And also they've worked on how Pokemon move about to perhaps make it look more natural as they explore around the environments. So those are some significant things, but everything else we've heard about, at least that I've talked about on the channel, seems to still kind of be a big plan. There's still talk of there being Majins, and that being kind of like this game's equivalent of terrestrialization or Dynamaxing, where the Pokemon changes around. There are a few different Majin types, which will impact how a Pokemon looks and presumably how it plays as well. Something else that's interesting is that they apparently had a mode that they took out of the game and just turned it into its own game, which is Pokopia. Initially it was supposed to be some sort of management minigame, but it became Pokopia. So that's a neat little change, and I'm fine with it. I'm personally not super interested in Pokopia. Maybe as we'll learn more, I'll change my mind on that. But it's interesting to consider how there were some ideas in Generation 10 that have become their own things. But the basic gist of what we come to understand about Pokemon Winds and Waves from the latest Terra leaks is that this is still going to be a massive world to explore that's more interactive than prior Pokemon games, with ride Pokemon that carry you around with your Rotom scooter, which you can take to the air, you can fly, go underwater, which is something that they're going back to, but in 3D open world that's certainly going to be a lot more complex, and there will also be Pokemon that will have varying speeds as you ride around on the land. But there's going to be islands. This is supposed to take place in South Asia, and they were incorporating some of the combat mechanics from the Legend series into Generation 10. How that will materialize, we shall see. But what do you make of these latest leaks and what they suggest about the 10th generation of Pokemon and the 30th anniversary? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I will see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.